Welcome to the Job Shop Show, where we talk with the owners, suppliers, partners, and customers of custom manufacturers. Listen and learn the secrets of top-performing job shops, the tools, techniques, and backgrounds that have made them successful, all in the quest of raising the bar for custom manufacturing. I'm your host, Jay Jacobs. This episode is sponsored by Paperless Parts, connecting buyers and suppliers of custom manufactured parts. The Paperless platform is a secure, ITAR-compliant, cloud-based manufacturing system for suppliers that reduces the amount of time spent on sales, estimating, quoting, administration, and order processing. It offers seamless integration with the accounting and ERP software tools that shops already use, such as QuickBooks, E2, and JobBoss. Paperless Parts was founded with a mission to make manufacturing more accessible by streamlining the quote-to-cash process. Spend less time quoting and more time selling.
This episode is sponsored by our friends at the NTMA, the National Tooling and Machining Association. The NTMA is an association of privately held, entrepreneurial-based, and family-owned businesses, representing nearly 1,200 small to mid-sized machine shops and tool and die shops across the country. They have approximately 30 very active regional chapters that host local events, run apprenticeship programs, and provide other services to their regional members. As an association of peers, the goal of the NTMA is to help members of the U.S. precision custom manufacturing industry achieve profitable growth and business success in a global economy through networking, workforce development and training, technology, best practices education, advocacy, programs, and services with industry partners. To learn how your company can get involved with the NTMA, including how to join, visit ntma.org.
Welcome, Job Shop enthusiast, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Job Shop Show. Your host, Jay Jacobs here. My passion is to help raise the bar for American custom part manufacturers, sharing tips, best practices, and peer-to-peer insights that help make us better shops and ultimately more competitive worldwide. Today's guest shares my passion and approaches it from a different angle. Harry Moser is the president of the Reshoring Initiative. The mission of the Reshoring Initiative, and this is from their website, is to bring good, well-paying manufacturing jobs back to the United States by assisting companies to more accurately assess their total cost of offshoring and shift collective thinking from offshoring is cheaper to local reduces the total cost of ownership. We are a nonprofit organization and offer a number of free tools to advance our mission. Before Harry started the Reshoring Initiative, he worked at a number of manufacturing companies, finishing his corporate career as president and chairman of the prestigious Aghi Sharmi Corporation. Harry is an inductee into the Industry Week Manufacturing Hall of Fame, worked with the Obama's administration's insourcing forum, and is constantly on social media these days. This guy keeps busy. Welcome to the Job Shop Show, Harry.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. One of the things that's interesting to me is, and where I'd like to start, is how you've taken a different path than others since you stepped away from running a successful company. Essentially, you retired, or you had the option to retire, and many in your positions simply downshift, perhaps play golf every day and otherwise kick back. Yet you've thrown yourself since 2005 into bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. Why?
Well, first, I think I did both. So before we had the crisis, I was playing tennis, running, lifting, what have you, an hour and a half, 2 hours every day. So I think I have the best of both worlds, because I'm getting that aspect of retirement, but I'm also doing what I really love, 8-10 hours a day. And to give you a little motivation on that, I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town was Singer Sewing Machine, which in its day, the building there was the largest factory in the world. My grandfather worked there as a foreman. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there in high school and college.
Wow.
And I drove past 10, 15 years ago and everything was gone. Nothing is made in the United States. Everything is imported. And that reminded me of all the industries I used to sell machine tools to, shoe equipment makers, textile equipment makers, foundry equipment makers, machine tool companies, yeah, and most of which are just gone.
Right.
And the equipment makers and the users of the equipment. And I cried then and said, this has to stop. We're going to bring it back. And that's what I've been doing since.
To give the listener some background on you so they're comfortable with why you have become an expert on reshoring, can you share a little bit about your corporate career, particularly your time at Aghi Sharmi, and from your vantage point, the impact, which I think you just touched upon, of offshoring and why it's devastated manufacturing and whole industries in the U.S.?
Yeah. So I was in foundry equipment for a while. And then I worked for Acme Cleveland, which was National Acme and Cleveland Twist Stirl. So great old names in machinery and tooling. Diesematic.
I remember them.
Diesematic foundry equipment.
Yeah.
Rotofinish vibratory finishing machinery, and then came to Sharmi, which is the EDM and high-speed milling machine company, which became Aghi Sharmi and now is GF Machining Solutions. So the company grew, expanded, bought new things, and I was very proud of the company because when we started, we were 7th or 8th in the industry, and 6 years later we were number 1. So it was as good a career as anybody could have, and most of my customers are your listeners. We sold mainly to mold makers and die makers and precision machine shops, all that kind of thing. And so I was an honorary member, an honored member of the NTMA, National Tooling and Machining Association. And I've worked closely with the PMA and the FMA and all these other organizations that again, your listeners are often part of. TMA in Chicago.
What sort of revenue did the company have when you left?
100 million.
That's pretty substantial for equipment sales.
Yeah, decent. Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful business. I loved my customers, my employees, the industry. It was as good a life as you could ask for.
So you must have been in hundreds, if not thousands, of job shops during your career. And were you actively involved in sales? Did you get out on the road a lot?
I was probably on the road and going to trade shows and conferences and things where the customers were. I was on the road at least a third of the time. I'd say much more than probably any other big company president. But I'll tell you a little story.
Yeah.
I was at an NTMA annual meeting. I was there talking to a Dwayne Treiber, who ran a big mold making shop in Minneapolis, and then I'm talking to another guy, let's say Bill, and Dwayne came over and said, Harry, he said, Bill, don't let Harry buy you dinner. And Bill said, why not? Free dinner. Harry's a nice guy. He said, Harry bought dinner for Shirley and me 2 years ago. And since then, I've bought $2 million worth of his machines.
Really expensive dinner.
My view was, the more customers I could meet, prospective customers, if they knew me, as soon as they knew me, they knew that if they had a problem, they could call me and I'd take care of the problem. Whereas otherwise, if you call the president, you've never met him, maybe you don't even get through. But this way, they knew they had access to me, and I was there to take care of them, and it worked. We got orders because of it.
What you just said is such a basic of customer service, and if you are a job shop owner listening, perhaps you ask yourself, am I accessible to my customers? Do I give my cell phone out to my customers? Will I take calls in the evening? And that is one of the ways that you can really differentiate yourself out there and truly, I think, give the type of customer service which touches upon probably the core of the topic which we're going to talk about today, which is the reshoring. But before we do that, I want to try to get from you some of the insights of what made a shop really good or excellent, better than others? Because again, you were in so many shops. What were they doing that made them different?
Training. I think training was an awfully important part of it. The U.S.
Training of the management or training of the hourly workforce?
I'd say mostly the hourly workforce. Ideally, the management is the ex-hourly workforce. That's the way
Okay.
it should be. That's the way it is in Germany. You get
Mhm.
really smart kids who go into the apprenticeship. They get their 4 years of incredibly good training. And I've taken tours to Switzerland specifically to see this. And
Mhm.
the owners, the senior management of good-sized companies, 1,000-person companies, are often ex-apprentices who work their way up through the system. They know the product, they know the process, they know the customer, they know the rest of the team, and therefore they're much more effective than a Harvard MBA parachuting into the company and not knowing what's going on. So I put a lot of emphasis on skilled workforce training.
Can you give us some specifics by what you mean by training? What
Apprenticeship.
should they be trained on?
Yeah, well, certainly to me, apprenticeship is the gold standard. Most people would agree that the German or Swiss
Mhm.
apprenticeship system, traditionally a 4-year apprenticeship system. Now the tendency is to take away the time criterion and instead go to skills based. When you're able to do these things, you have passed your apprenticeship, even if it's only took 2 years, but because you had 10 years of prior experience, for example. And but getting the people to that level, the training is the apprenticeships are also important. Some people 4 years is too long, and for them certificates. So there's excellent certificate systems provided by MSSC and by NIMS, and both of them offer credentials in or related to machining activities, and having some number of credentials can be as valuable as having a bachelor's degree.
So those are something that the existing workforce who perhaps have been with you 5, 10 plus years could still learn more and gain skills and become more valuable for your shop.
For your shop and also for themselves. That when
Yes.
as they pick up those credentials, they see themselves professionalizing, which is good for their morale, good for their self-image, good for their feeling of worth as an employee, as a stakeholder in your company.
I remember at Rapid, we brought on a lot of young men who became either estimators and or what I'll call manufacturing engineers, prepping the jobs before they hit the floor. And we created our own internal certificate program. We had 3 levels, and those were highly coveted, and you really earned them. But if you did earn them, they meant something, and every person who got the certificate, I would sign them, we would celebrate, and that would be displayed prominently in their work area. And it doesn't just have to be, I guess, on the floor as an example.
Good. I agree.
Flipping to, before we leave your corporate experience, I have my own thoughts on whether to buy new or used equipment, even if it's gently used. You were in the business of selling new equipment. Why does it make sense to spend more money on newer equipment than buy something that has already been out there for a while?
Okay. You presupposed the answer. Actually, at Charmy, we sold both. So we'd have the customers could trade in their old machines. We would refurbish them and resell them and get them up to perform as they did when they were new. So we were actively
it's sort of like a
involved in
certified car program where
exactly.
you knew that what you were buying wasn't a lemon.
Wasn't a lemon, yeah. So actually, we did some studies on this back, when I was there, when we took the previous generation machine and had the best people make best performance they could on that, and then the performance on the newest generation machine, and prove that there was a 20, 30% whatever improvement in cycle time, surface finish accuracy, what have you. And so we could at that time at least document the enhancements of the newest models versus the oldest models, which is certainly part of that justification. Obviously, other portions are the training that comes with it, and the warranty, the 1-year warranty, what have you, that comes with it. And having the newest means that it's anytime in the future its residual value will be highest. Now, actually, on this subject, many of your listeners should know AMT, which puts on IMTS, the big machine tool show in September. And so I was just on a phone call with Pat McGibbon, our VP of market research data, I think he calls it. And they're working with me on a project to estimate or quantify for a range of machine tools how much costs come down using the newest model versus 5-year, 10-year, 15-year-old model. And I intend to use that to as part of the argument of reshoring, because it's essential to get the U.S. costs down to be competitive, but also to convince the government that when they're talking about infrastructure, they're always talking about spending trillions of dollars on infrastructure to make us competitive, and that having the newest and best manufacturing equipment is going to actually do more for our competitiveness than fixing the railroad track or the bridge or what have you. How much actual cost do we lose because of the conditions now, assuming the bridge doesn't collapse? Not very much. I mean, this stuff gets from place to place. Whereas having I'd like to show that if everybody had, on average, 4-year-old machines instead of 11-year-old machines, that we'd be 20 or 30% more competitive, and therefore the work would flow back into the United States. And therefore the government should adjust the tax system and other incentives to help companies do that.
I totally agree with you there, Harry. And I'll give you an example. At Rapid, I didn't have the data to back it up originally, but I just believed intuitively what you said. And we ran Haas machining centers. We had a 5-year-old Haas, and the structure that we tried to put in place, it didn't always happen, but when a machine reached 5 years old, we would sell it and replace it with a new machine. But it was amazing to me. We ran the same exact program on a 5-year-old Haas VF2 and a brand new, recently installed VF2. And I think we had something around a 20% cycle time reduction on what was supposed to be the same machine. But in those 5 years, they had so dramatically improved, probably in a whole bunch of different areas, the way that the machine performed. And we could see ourselves that time savings. So
are you convinced that all the savings was due to the improvement in the new machine as opposed to the degradation of the old machine?
Probably because we ran mostly aluminum and we didn't put a lot of spindle hours on our machines. They were not abused. They were, and they were maintained. We had a lot of money put into regular maintenance, so we had, I think, fairly good equipment that was running even though it was used.
On that same subject, we did some studies where we'd have our best applications engineer run a part on the die sinking, the RAM EDM, and then we'd challenge our customers to have their best guy run the same part, and typically their best guy was 20% slower than our best guy, and then we'd train them to bring them up to the best possible condition. So show them the ROI on training.
That's a great example there. And as we're talking about, this is, if we made the investment, if the government was able to reward companies from a tax incentive perspective to make the investments, we would definitely be reducing costs, which makes it a lot easier for companies to reshore.
Yeah.
So let's get into the reshoring initiative. What is the reshoring initiative? And I looked on the website, you reported in 2018, 1,389 companies brought back over 145,000 jobs. So you're having a lot of success and making an impact.
Yeah, you have to put that in perspective, you have to understand where we started. So in 2010,
Yes.
in 2010, when we formally started the reshoring initiative, we were able to find 6,000 jobs announced coming back. And that's a combination of reshoring by US companies, think General Motors, and FDI, foreign direct investment by foreign companies, think Toyota, for example. So 6,000 jobs in 2010, and that actually peaked at 180,000 in 2017, and then has moderately fallen off in 2018 and 2019 because of the trade war, business uncertainty, dollars up a little bit, a series of things like that. But still at a number, 145,000, as you said, in 2018, which was still way up from 6,000 in 2010. So we were still in a strong reshoring trend, and the current coronavirus crisis, et cetera, is only accelerating that further.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a little bit, but why has the trend increased in the 10 years to more reshoring?
Yeah.
What's driving that?
Well, when I'm vain, I'd say we are, and we actually play an important role in it. There was a conference that the Commerce Department put on about 5 years ago, and the then chief economist of the Commerce Department called me, shouted me out in the audience and said, reshoring would not be happening today if it were not for the reshoring initiative and Harry Moser. So we played an important role in it. President Obama helped, President Trump has certainly helped, but the underlying economic causes, first, Chinese wages have risen about 15% per year for the last 15 or 20 years. And that's because of two things. First, the demand for labor has skyrocketed as their economy grew at 10% a year. And the supply of labor is actually shrinking because the one-child policy went into effect in about 38, 39 years ago, which means that the cohort of people less than 38, 39, 40 is about half as big as it would have been. And the working population of China is dropping by about 3 million per year. So you've got the demand for labor going up, the supply of labor going down, price of labor goes up. And that's good for them. They get a decent living, but it makes them less competitive than they were before. And that's to our advantage. So wages going up offshore in China, China being less hospitable. When companies went there 10 years ago, China was open-armed, lover for them. Whereas now China is clearly helping their state-owned enterprises at the expense of foreign companies. They're not as welcoming. Third, companies are starting to recognize what we call total cost of ownership. We're gradually, and it's painfully gradual, that we're getting them to go away from looking only at the ex-works price, let's say 8 in China versus 10 in the US, and instead to look at the total cost, which includes duty, freight, carrying cost of inventory, a range of 28 other costs than price. And when you add all those in, that 8 to 10 difference typically goes away. So some companies, not all, but increasingly companies are saying it isn't just the price, you have to look at everything.
So China is typically the country mentioned when we talk about where manufacturing jobs have left the US, but what about other Asian countries? Are they, how much of a threat do you see them either individually or collectively? Should be targeting bringing those types of parts back as well?
We target everything. So we're sort of equal threat to, to all the countries. And China has been the source of about 50% of the reshoring that has happened.
Mm.
Okay, despite their overwhelming strength in manufacturing, et cetera. But it has come back significantly from Mexico, from India, from
Mm.
Turkey, from Vietnam, Cambodia, whatever. But at the same time, work has left the U.S. and gone to some of those countries.
Mhm.
There's still offshoring, much less per year than there was before, but still happens sometimes. One of those Harvard MBAs parachuting in, saving the
Mhm.
company, and uh, and the uh, and so it's always a struggle. A lot of the work that has come out of China because of the trade wars, because of the rising wages, et cetera, went to Vietnam. 6 months
Right.
ago, Vietnam was the poster child. A lot was going to Vietnam, but repeated surveys suggested that, for example, 40% of foreign companies in China were pulling some of their work out, and of the 40, maybe 6 out of 40, so 15% of what was coming out was coming to the U.S.
Mm.
And an equal or perhaps greater portion was going to Mexico.
Mhm.
And then a lot was going to Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, other places that made sense. But what companies have found since, prior to this virus problem,
Mhm.
was that those other countries, especially the small ones like Vietnam, Cambodia, if you pull 10% of Chinese, say 5% of Chinese manufacturing out and shove it into Vietnam, that doubles the output in Vietnam.
Yeah,
Okay.
sort of blows up the country there because
Yeah.
and their wages will increase and
And logistics goes to
yeah,
hell, and you
yeah,
can't get all the components, and et cetera, et cetera, et
right.
cetera. So it hasn't turned out to be as perfect a solution for people. But there is competition. There always will be competition. It's
Mhm.
up to our companies and our country to make us able to withstand or overcome that competition.
One of the things that you are credited with really doing is getting the customer in the US in the mood and softening them up so that they are willing to take a look at reshoring. You're constantly writing articles on podcasts. I just actually listened to one of your podcasts where you were on with a fellow from Mazak, which was interesting to me since I believe they're a Japanese company, Japanese tool supplier,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they're uh, having someone like you promoting the manufacturing in the US, which of course they are selling machine tools here in the US. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah. The reality is that Haas, that you mentioned,
Hmm.
is one of the largest machine tool builders in the world. Done an incredibly good
Absolutely.
job, but there isn't a lot other than Haas. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
few small companies. There's sort of remnants of some of the older big companies.
Hmm.
Thieves and others still have divisions here, but the vast majority, I can't remember, 70%, 80%, something of the machine tools purchased in the United States are imported. So if the U.S. wants to be competitive, wants to expand its capacity and its efficiency, it's pretty much dependent on those foreign brands. Now, Mazak that you mentioned, I've been several times to their facility in Florence, Kentucky, which is
Oh,
a
so they are
which is
making machines in Kentucky? Great.
which is a major manufacturing facility. I'm quite sure hundreds of workers,
Hmm.
and probably in its own right is probably the second or third largest machine tool manufacturing facility in the United States. So I feel very comfortable working with them to uh, increase reshoring, and that'll certainly increase their production in the U.S. It'll bring in some machines, I'm sure, from offshore. And if that makes your listeners more competitive, well, then that's wonderful. And but it would be ideal if some people started new U.S. machine tool manufacturers. But that's a
Or
hard job.
or the foreign machine tool manufacturers like the car manufacturers open plants here in the US to supply the US market, because if nothing else, you're creating manufacturing jobs in the US, and you also are developing the skill sets, because these companies are typically, I think, employing pretty advanced manufacturing technologies to make their own products. So we are training and cross-training the US workforce in some great advanced manufacturing technologies, which we can bring to other industries in the US.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I would like to talk about the total cost of ownership estimator, but before we do that, I want to make this relative to our listeners who are really more the small to medium-sized job shop owners, who I think, even though I had quite a few team members at my company, we didn't have the international contacts. We didn't have the relationships necessarily within our customers to have a conversation about reshoring. So how do we, as small shop owners, how do we play in this reshoring initiative in the world?
Yeah. There's a couple of ways. They can preferentially buy U.S. metal, steel from the U.S. instead of from China or somewhere else.
So that may cost a little more, but that's one of the things that you sort of have to, if you want U.S. manufacturing jobs, you got to look at how you're impacting U.S. manufacturing jobs.
Each of us as consumers, individual consumers, as shops. So you could buy the steel and aluminum that's made in the U.S. Aluminum's tougher. You could buy cutting tools made here by Kennametal and Sandvik in the U.S. and so on, as opposed to imported, to the extent that you can make that differentiation. You can buy related accessories like Big Kaiser, a good friend of mine, Chris Kaiser. They're producing some of their product here in the United States. That's great. They can, say it's a stamping shop or a molder, they can buy their molds and their stamping dies in the U.S. instead of buying them from offshore. Lots of possibilities if a Haas machine is the right machine for them, they can buy a Haas instead of an equivalent coming in from China or Taiwan or somewhere. A lot they can do, but that's what they can do in terms of their purchasing. I think that the key thing, the thing that we're much more likely to get them excited about, is what they can do for their sales, for their revenue.
Okay.
And so for that, on our website, they can look up and find under resources the import substitution program. So
what is that?
That's a way that the shop can substitute its output for imports that their customers or their prospective customers are now bringing in. So the way this works, we'll work with a company. So right now we're working, for example, with an injection molder, and the injection molder has defined the kinds of molded products that they're especially good at. This material, that size, for that application, and so on. And we agree on a range of definitions of those products and the HS codes, which is how you categorize products that are being exported or imported. And it's just a number that defines that description. And then we tell them who the biggest importers are of those products, either in the country or within 500 miles or whatever territory they want to pick, who those importers are, company name, address, how many tons they're bringing in, whom they're buying it from offshore, roughly, very roughly, what they're paying for it. Okay, so we take your job shop from the current condition where they walk in and see a customer, a prospective customer, and say, "John, you need any more parts next year?" And John says, "We're doing okay. Yeah, it's okay." and then they walk out. Then instead they come in and say, John, I see you're buying 30 tons a year of widgets. We just put in a great new multitasking, multi-spindle, what have you machine that is the most efficient way in the world to make widgets. And we've run our cost on it. We know that labor is only 10% of the total.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter where you're buying it in the world, if their wage rates are zero, it can't be much more than 10% less than ours. And I've done this total cost of ownership estimator calculation, and it suggests that there's 20 points that you're leaving on the table when you look at duty and freight and carrying cost of inventory, and 35% in this case if it's coming out of China, and we know you're getting a lot of them from China because the Trump tariffs apply to it. So you're going to be 15 points better off if you buy that material from me instead of continuing to import it.
Which sort of titles at your customer are involved in that sort of discussion? Will it happen at the purchasing agent level? Do you need to get to the purchasing manager, VP of procurement? Where do you start?
Yeah. Where do you start? I think I'd say you start with your normal contact, the people you would normally walk in to see. Whether they call it purchasing, procurement, a lot of people call it procurement, might be supply chain. And sometimes that'll work, and sometimes it won't. In some of these companies, I've had salesmen tell me, I go in and I say, I know you're having warranty issues. I know you're having quality issues. I know you're having lack of inventory or too much inventory. And the procurement person says, those aren't in my budget. Those are in somebody else's budget. So I don't care. Okay.
So
the
true.
Silo effect. Okay?
It's so true.
Yeah. Now, if the president of the company heard that, he'd have to disagree. Okay. So you start at that level. Maybe you get somebody at the company to listen to this podcast and hear the things we're saying. You have them call me, you have them go to our website, but if you can't, but part of the problem is that these procurement people are typically rewarded on something called purchase price variance. Okay,
Yeah.
We've been buying these for $10 a piece. If you can get it down to $8, that's $2 a piece. You buy 100,000, that's $200,000 of purchase price variance, and that's maybe what it takes to get his bonus. So he's going to be hesitant to agree with you. Okay, so if necessary, then with that person, you have to go up a level or two levels in the chain. You've got to meet the general manager on the golf course, or for a beer, and say, Sue, I'm having problems. We want to help your company. We want to reduce your total cost, and your procedures are getting in the way of both of us being more profitable. Can we work together?
I often found that some of the companies, the procurement folks were, as you said, that the metrics were as you described, but the shipping costs weren't part of that.
Actually, about 8 years ago, I was giving a presentation, and my host at lunch was a senior supply chain person from one of the biggest aerospace companies. And I said, Bill, how do you make decisions? He said, price. I said, really, just price? He said, yeah. Here, imagine. He said, we have this housing, and he went like this with his hands. So I'm thinking 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds. He said, we source that in the U.S., casting, something like that. We air freight it to China to be machined. We air freight it back to be plated. We air freight it back again to be machined. We air freight it back here to be assembled into the end product. And when we make the decision to do that or to source everything in the U.S., we only look at the prices. We exclude the freight costs, we exclude the inventory carrying costs and the paperwork and everything else that goes with it.
Crazy. And
one of the biggest companies in the country. So the survey says approximately 60% of companies make those decisions based on price or at best landed cost, which would be price, duty, freight, but leaving off maybe 26 other costs and risks that should be considered.
For the import substitution program, is someone who is interested, is everything they need right on their website, or is a conversation with you really required to understand the structure?
Yeah, on the website, there's a description,
Mhm.
and there's a form that they can fill out to start describing the part that the parts they're good at making. You know, the one this isn't for the shop that has 3 people and they say, oh, we can make anything that comes in that'll fit on our machine, and we don't specialize, we just make everything. Well, that's not going to work. It's best if they're specialists in high volume, small, precise, electronics, or maybe valves or fittings, or something, so I can focus. Otherwise, I can't bring them a lot of value. They have to at least be really good at 1, 2, 3, 4 things, so I can come out and find the best fits. But they can fill that form out, and there's a place to send it to us. The description of the program is there on the website. The only thing that isn't there is the price for this, because this is a paid service. But for the information of your listeners, that program, where we do everything remotely, we train them on using the TCO estimator. We help them over the phone. We help them by email, but I don't come out. That's $5,000. Okay.
Well, we're all learning how to use Zoom for meetings, so that probably will work.
And let me mention one last thing on that, because for some of them, 5 might seem like a lot. We have a sort of an introductory program where they can we can go back and forth and just do that definition of the product, like fill out that form, a couple of iterations back and forth, and we'll study the market. We'll send them a sample of what we found, and that's $1,000. So we're willing to take that, if they're willing to take a very small investment.
Yeah, that's pretty reasonable.
To prove like proof of function or proof of purpose for this, and find out if it's worth proceeding, with the other 4,000 to take it up to 5,000. So we know the time is right for this, and we want it to be. I wanted to fit it to the pocketbooks of shops, but still, it's not the 2 or 3 man shops. It's a relatively focused shop.
I think even if nothing comes out of it, $1,000 for what you could learn by engaging with you and the initiative would be so beneficial. That's money definitely well spent. And we're in the COVID-19 time. There is probably going to be a lot of reshoring happening because many companies were blindsided with the opaqueness of their supply chains, and the medical community, the medical equipment supplier manufacturers or product providers have just been whacked. Would you just speak to that for a second?
Yeah, it's almost every article you read on the subject right now discusses that. There's a broad range of medical devices where we are 80 to 95% dependent on imports, and within that, significantly on China. So this includes penicillin, other antibiotics, the masks, the gowns, the ventilators, all kinds of things that we were when demand was normal, whatever that was a year ago, we were getting 80, 90% from 95% from offshore. And now that demand is 10 or 20 times normal, so we're trying to go from 10% of normal to 10 times normal, which is a factor of 100. And that's why you see all this craziness about GM making ventilators and so on, because the ventilator companies can't just ramp up and double or triple. We were starting from essentially zero and trying to go big. And so this has proven that in the medical device area, we're woefully overly dependent, woefully unself-sufficient. And and as a result of that, 2 or 3 senators, congressmen have introduced bills to fix that problem. So that should, I'm confident that'll happen. That'll help all of us. And but the key is to then, once we're past the crisis on the medical products, to expand that from yes, this is a medical war, a health war. What happens if the next one is a military war and
Hmm.
we can't make the steel that we need? We can't make the aluminum. We can't make the bullets. We can't make the tanks. We can't make the whatever. And we're dependent on China for a lot of that material. Well, that's stupid. And so I think people are starting to see that the U.S. in general has to be much more self-sufficient.
Yeah, I want to just throw a couple bullet points out there. The drug manufacturers, particularly the generic product folks, are a lot of the generic drugs are manufactured in India. And okay, India wasn't exposed to the coronavirus, so supply chain safe. Not so much, because most of the raw materials for the generic medicines come from China.
Exactly.
That's what I meant by the opaqueness of the supply chain. And it really should be thought of as a national economic defense. And manufacturing in the US, as you said, is critical. And a couple things that really bothered me is that we have chips that computer chips that are manufactured in Taiwan for our Defense Department. That's the only place they're made. And how far is Taiwan from mainland China? That worries me. The steel capacity in the US is, there's some here, it's coming back, the mini mills, but there's an ingredient in some of the high strength specialty steels, manganese steel, that 93% of it is produced in China. So they, as you said, in steel, we could be shut off from the steel requirements that we would need to produce the equipment, and not just military, but all the other manufacturing equipment if we had to quickly bring that back into the US. So it is something to really ponder, what happens when supply chains get shut down, and how do we want to be able to respond as a country?
Agreed. Yep.
So we've been teasing folks about the TCO, the total cost of ownership estimator that you have. Could you explain what that is and the different pieces of it?
Okay. Before that, let me
Yeah.
give them a little more motivation to listen,
Okay.
because any software explanation always has a bit of lack of excitement. So to get them excited, we people who use the TCO system online, free on our website, we slice and dice their data. So we took 250 cases of China versus the US, where
Mm-hmm.
the company said they were doing a real case, real study. And of those cases, in 8% of the cases that they studied, the US ex works price was lower. In other words, US wins 8% of the time based on price. When the customer, when you got down to the total cost of ownership line, which included all these 29 factors, the US won 32% of the time. We go from 8% winning on price to 32% winning based on total cost. And if a 15% Trump tariff was in place on the product, the US won 46% of the time. And if the US company could figure out how to cut its selling price, its manufacturing cost by, say, 10% by investing in the newest equipment or going lean or doing something like that, then it goes up to about 60%. So it isn't like, you're playing around, maybe you can get a dribble back here and there. If we can get the big companies to do the math correctly, if your listeners will use the tools to convince the big companies to do the math correctly,
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of billions of dollars worth of work can come back, millions of manufacturing jobs. Yeah, more than we have good manufacturing people to produce.
Well, what I like about it, again, this is software and a spreadsheet and that, but this is data. And it's not just a warm, fuzzy, bring business back to the US, create jobs. This is where you can present that it makes financial sense.
Correct. So that's to keep your listeners listening. Okay? And so if you go to our website, www.reshorenow.org, you'll find a a blue bar at the top. One of the boxes is total cost of ownership estimator. And you click on that, it takes you to a page. You have to sign up, create a password, what have you, but free. And then when you come back, you sign in. When you sign in, you'll have access and you can just start humming and putting in data. Or you can go to the sample. So there's an example that's posted there just to give you a feeling. So you feel, okay, this is new, this is different. Harry's not here to tell me. So you go there, you can look at the sample that Harry filled out so you can understand that. And I've got in front of me that sample. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of it so you can see it. And but the idea is not to put in the same numbers I put in, but to put in your numbers, for the listeners who do it, to put in the numbers that they know apply. And especially if they're doing it, I guess anybody who's doing it, big company or job shop, you should put in conservative numbers. You don't want to overestimate, because if you do that, then the procurement person's going to say, "Oh, you're just cooking the books," or the accountant's going to say, "No, that's not real." And so it's important to keep especially the soft items on the conservative side rather than on the high side, so as to maintain credibility, so you win the argument. Okay, so I've got it in front of me now, and basically it has a series of rows, starting with price. Price obviously is a big piece of this, and then a series of columns, and the U.S. There's one column for the U.S. There's one column for offshore, and in that offshore column, you pick the country that it's relevant to. And why do you pick a country? Because that could change the duty rate, and will change the freight cost from there to, and we have built in the freight cost to Chicago, just to have a central industrial kind of location. So
Sure.
You cannot pick but Chicago should be pretty close. And then there's some, so then you go through this form, you answer the question for the U.S. source, which is, if it's a job shop, it's your price, and then your best guess at what the offshore price is. The customer's been telling you China is 30% lower than you are. Okay, put in a number 30% lower than where you are, or put in any number, run all the percentages, and then come back and find out what number for the offshore source still leaves your total cost lower. So you can do like an iteration and find out what the sensitivity is. So there's the factor like price, there's US, there's offshore, and then there's a column called common, because, for example, the annual quantity of parts, number of widgets, is the same whether they get them from China or from the US, unless China has to ship more because you're going to throw away the bad ones.
Okay.
That's supposed to be funny.
No, it's
anyway.
Harry, I remember a customer who bought parts from China, then say for every 100 parts, they said, yeah, we go through them and we're probably throwing away 20. We know the quality isn't really good, but well, that's just what we have to deal with. And I'm sure they didn't account for the cost of sorting and throwing away those 20.
They maybe didn't even account for the 20.
Yeah, let's give, yes, they may have done that, but I'm sure not all the other aggravation.
Yeah. And if you just to expand on that a little bit, if 20 of them are so visibly bad that you throw them away, are there 10 or 15 that are not quite visibly bad, but that snuck through and got out into your system and messed up warranty or performance?
Yep.
Yeah, tight tolerances within reason have value. So you start with price, quantity, product category. Is it a tool? Is it a thing? Why? Because that helps to define the duty rate, the regular duty rate, not the trump rate. If you know the duty rate, you can put that in on the category, and then that supersedes the product category. The weight, what is it? It's in pounds. There's also a right-hand column of this that describes what we're looking for, helps you understand it, helps you understand how we're going to use the data in the calculation, So it
Mhm.
makes it easier for you to know what Harry is looking for, what the system's looking for when you fill this out. I'm going to skip down things like number of shipments per year. Why? Because that changes the shipping costs a little bit, and it
Yep.
also changes the inventory carrying cost. The
Just
percentage. Go ahead.
Harry, just to step back a sec for the listener, what what I saw when I went through this, and what we had talked about before we we hit record here, is that essentially there's three pieces of the total cost of ownership. You have the actual cash expenses, the possible cash expenses, and then trying to categorize any risks. Is that in general the three categories that these fall into?
Yeah, it's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. I'd say there's three categories. There's uh, obvious hard cash expenses like the
Yep.
price, the freight, the maybe travel costs to go visit the supplier. Those would be
Hmm.
absolute hard cash. Nobody can argue with you about those. And
Right.
then there's calculated cash costs like
Oh.
carrying cost of inventory.
Hmm.
It's a calculation, and most companies don't apply it on an SKU basis, but it's still there. They've got
Hmm.
millions of dollars worth of inventory. It's costing them money.
Hmm.
And then there's risks, and risk could be quality, it could be risk of air freight instead of surface freight.
Hmm.
The last batch was bad, surface air freight in the new batch, bam, somebody's paying for it. The risk of intellectual property risk, of natural disaster risk, with which I include the coronavirus as a form of natural disaster. Right?
Yep.
And so those three categories, and inevitably the accountants will give you the most. They'll listen most to the hard costs, the absolute ones that are actually appear in their ERP or financial system. They'll
Hmm.
give you, I'd say, pretty good on the calculated costs, like carrying cost of inventory, because they believe in that, because they're always trying to cut inventory. And then on the risks, then you're likely to get into debate. So at the end of this whole system, you put in all these answers, and then it calculates 29 different costs based on algorithms that take your answers for the first part, put them together in little equations,
Hmm.
and come up with answers with each of the equations spelled out, so you and your procurement person know how it was calculated. And then down in graphs that come out, it says of the total cost, how much of it was these uh,
Mm.
hard costs, and how much of it is the calculated, how much is the risk cost. So the procurement person or the chief financial officer might say, I'll give you the first two categories, but I'll only give you half of the last category. Okay, that's better than the condition when I came in. And to take on that inventory topic, we had a company we knew quite well, Mori Corp. They're an EMS company. They make populate circuit boards and make similar devices. And they told me about a case where they had a housing that had failed, and
Hmm.
their customer insisted that they bring the supply chain back to the US. And when they did that, their inventory was cut by 94% because they didn't have
Wow.
container loads. They didn't have extra piles because they didn't know what the quality was going to be. They
Right.
didn't know what demand was going to be. So now we're not promising anybody 94%, but maybe a 50% reduction in inventory would make sense,
Hmm.
especially if you can go just in time. And for most companies, if they could get a 50% reduction in inventory, that would make up for an awful lot of price difference on the product.
Hmm.
Okay?
I like it. I
Yeah.
like it. This is such a valuable tool, and I encourage the listener again. This is free, and right on the website, you can jump in and be using it in a minute.
So just to
Really
give
fast.
you,
Really. I just want to say it's really fascinating because you nailed all the pieces that, and so many of them aren't obvious or intuitive in how you look at it, even to someone who's in the manufacturing world. So thank you for putting that together.
a lot of groups in the past, American Mold Builders Association,
Hmm.
TMA, I think in Chicago, have had have written little pieces that say there's a 20% cost penalty of offshoring, you know,
Hmm.
and having just one number, the customer is likely to say, well, that doesn't apply to me. That applies to somebody else.
Hmm.
That's why I customized it so it would fit exactly to that customer. Give you another example. This Mori Corp that I mentioned
Hmm.
outside Chicago. The VP sales came to me about 4 years ago, and he said, Harry, I'm about to lose my best U.S. customer because a Chinese competitor has offered a lower price than ours, and I can't match it. And so
Hmm.
Tony and I did the calculation. He took it into the customer, and on our website we have a quote from him crediting using the TCO calculation as the key to saving a 60 million dollar order.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a lot of jobs.
I should have asked for a commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
obviously, most of your listeners don't get $60 million orders, but if they could get a couple of $100,000 or $200,000 orders,
Hmm.
and especially just a thought that right now, if you're say you're in Cleveland or Buffalo or somewhere, and there's 10 machine shops, and to a certain extent, you're competing with each other over the same bones.
Hmm.
You sell
Yeah.
sort of the same
Yeah.
customers. Each year, the word comes up. Somebody cuts the price a little bit. Somebody screwed up last year, what have you. Maybe the bone moves from shop to shop, kind of thing. Huh?
Hmm.
Whereas when you try our import substitution program, all of a sudden there's this whole other huge volume of work that becomes available that nobody else in the U.S. is bidding on because they think it's locked in with China or India or somewhere, and it's not, and they can't be competitive. So now you're there. You're not going to win everyone, but you don't win everyone when you fight over the bone in Cleveland now. So it gives you a whole new range of opportunities for bringing work into your shop, which could be very valuable coming out of this crisis.
Another way that you might be able to compete for business that's being reshored is, I know you have associations with a lot of organizations out there like the NTMA you mentioned, the PMA, you do purchasing fairs, and there's other sort of events where a custom part manufacturer can get in front of folks who are looking to reshore, where you or someone else have done the softening up work and got them in the mood to want to buy in the U.S.
Well,
What sort of opportunities, events exist? Obviously, we're not doing them right now, but in the back
well,
in the
we're
summer,
doing them pretty
yeah.
soon.
Hmm.
This morning I was on a Zoom call with AMT, and as most of many of your listeners, at least in machining, know, AMT is the association that puts on IMTS, which is the
Hmm.
130,000 person machine tool show in McCormick Place every second year, including this year.
Hmm.
And so they've committed to a major focus on this. They call it connecting the domestic supply chain.
Mm.
Okay, connecting with the customer. And so we're going to have a significant booth there. We'll have staff. We're going to have all kinds of press releases, media, webinars, podcasts, whatever leading up to that. And the
Hmm.
idea is to bring the OEMs in, the customers in, and soften them up.
Hmm.
My job, and to bring the job shops in and train them on doing this. We've also we're asking the exhibitors, the Mazaks, to tell us about cases where their equipment has been good enough to help uh, either an OEM or a job shop decide to reshore, where it made them competitive enough, right? And also to tell us the categories of widgets
Mm.
where their machine is so competitive that it should be easy to bring the work back.
Hmm.
And then when the OEMs come in and say, yeah, okay, tell me about widgets, we say, well, Mazak or George Fisher, somebody has a system that's really great at widgets. They believe they can do it. Why don't you go talk to them and then come on back? Let's do the TCO calculation, and either you buy a machine or we've got a couple of nice job shops around here that would be delighted to buy a machine and make those for you. So that's in September at McCormick Place, IMTS.
Great. You are such a dot connector, Harry. That's probably the best way to describe and it's so needed. It's so needed, and you're doing a fantastic job there. I think this is a good place for us to call it a day.
Could I just throw a couple more of those on?
Yeah.
AMA, Association for Manufacturing Excellence. They're the biggest lean organization promoting lean, and their annual conference is going to be in Toronto in October, and they're putting a big focus on this same supply chain reshoring concept. Gardner Media, which puts out Modern Machine Shop and 3 or 4 other excellent magazines. They're having a series of 4 webinars on this, where we start with an overview, and then we do one focus for the OEMs, and then one for the job shops, and then one for the government, talking to each of these constituencies. And so there's a lot going on like that to make this happen. A couple of the quick advices for the shops that you
before you get into the advice, I think that your website is really good at listing all these different types of events that are coming up. So if you are curious about where you might participate, go to reshorenow.org.
That's great. Perfect. So just advice from my studies of what's possible. And there's a limit to how low you can go on price. Our wages are higher, et cetera, et cetera. But delivery. If the Chinese are really clever, and they'll put their people on 24 hours a day if they have to get the thing out, see? And if they can get it out of their shop 4 weeks faster than you can get it out of your shop, then your advantage of being close to the customer and having one-day delivery just went away. Right. If you can get it out of your shop as fast as they can get out of their shop, you've got a 4-week delivery advantage. Many customers will pay a little more to have a 4-week delivery advantage, because then they can have less inventory just in time, et cetera, et cetera. So to us, delivery is key. One thing I'd suggest bigger shops look at is something called QRM, Quick Response Manufacturing, which is a methodology put out by the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And it helps you. I've been to their conferences. Company after company describes how, especially in high mix, low volume, typical job shop environment, companies have cut delivery times by a factor of 2 or 3 and cut costs. So I think it's well worth looking at.
I would also, I'm just going to add a piece of that, which was an edge for me at Rapid, is it's important to manufacture the parts quickly, but if you don't quote quickly, then you're not going to get that opportunity. We quoted sometimes instantly, but typically we had a 2-hour response time on our quotes, and we often delivered parts before the customer had quotes back from other shops. That the customers will not wait. You have to quote fast and you have to deliver fast.
I talked to a shop recently, a very successful shop, and they go out to the customers and ask the customers to give them prints, and they have a very automated system of quoting, and they have the quote on file. And so as soon as the minute that the customer comes in and asks for a quote, they send the quote, because they've already developed the quote in preparation for getting the order. And so
Love it.
You talked before about responsiveness. The nature of the Chinese or Indian supplier, they're at different time zones, different languages, different cultures, pretty hard for the customer to talk to them easily. So if the customer calls you at your shop and it's easy to get through to you and get an answer, get a problem resolved, well, then you have a unique advantage that they don't have with that foreign supplier. Whereas if they call you and the message is left and 4 days later, you get it back to them, well, the Chinese have gotten back to them by email.
Right.
So don't give away the advantages of person-to-person responsiveness.
Great point. Well, thank you so much, Harry, for chatting with us today. And I think most importantly, for not fading into I was going to say woodwork, but maybe I should say the metalwork. And instead, you bellied up. You are making such a positive impact on bringing manufacturing jobs back into the U.S. So important,
Yeah.
so appreciated. The U.S. really needs to be thinking about our overseas supply chains today. It is a economic threat, a national economic defense area that needs to be addressed. And you, as the Reshoring Initiative, have created a platform that allows us to get started, not waste months or years creating the tools to quantify to the bean counters why it makes sense to do so. The TCO spreadsheet, it's such a powerful tool that's, again, free for anyone to use. So I'm very grateful for what you've done for U.S. manufacturers and what I know you will continue to do. Anything else before we go that you'd like to impart to our listeners?
Well, your listeners are the key members of the team. And if they listen to this and say, Harry, well, that's nice, good luck, well, then I'm going to continue to make results, but not as much as I could. If they take advantage of what we've offered them, if they use the TCO estimator, if they call on us for help, then they can magnify my efforts by a factor of 10 or 100. So in their interest, in the interest of their kids, in the interest of the country, let's all do it together.
Yeah. And again, how do people reach you? And
no, info@reshorenow.org or harry.moser@reshorenow.org is totally, that's direct. And 847-867-1144. However, any of those ways reach me, and I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your story and work on opportunities together.
well, thank you for making yourself so available to our listeners. Folks, a lot to digest from this conversation. Big takeaway for me is that there is more to the cost perspective than just the hard costs. And as a shop owner, we may not be able to have the conversations with the right people at our customers at the OEMs. However, there are things we can do to position our companies to be able to compete and be easier for the OEMs to bring business back. And if nothing else, promote the Reshoring Initiative and let them do that softening up at the larger level for us. So when our shop is ready to take those jobs, the customers are going to be ready for us. And if you've won any work that is a result of reshoring, let us know. Let Harry know, because he does have an award for that. These stories are so powerful and we want to share them. Until next time, keep those spindles turning, those lasers cutting, and invest in your shop. Have a great day.